The mysterious discovery. Jake Walker wiped the sweat off his forehead as he climbed over a rocky ridge. The planet, Vera 7, was nothing but dry land, strange glowing plants, and eerie silence. His ship's scanners had picked up some interesting signals here, which meant there could be something valuable hidden in the wasteland. As a scavenger, that was his job, finding lost things in forgotten places. But today, something felt different. The air was heavy, the silence too deep. Even the usual chirping of alien insects was missing. Jake adjusted his visor and kept moving. His boots crunched over cracked ground as he made his way toward the scanner signal. Then he heard it. A soft whimper. Jake froze. He wasn't alone. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound. Behind a group of spiky red rocks, something was moving. Carefully, he approached. His heart pounded. He had been on dangerous planets before, where the smallest creatures were the deadliest. His fingers hovered over his blaster, ready for anything. Then he saw it. A tiny, fluffy creature lay trapped in a metal net. Its fur was pure white, glowing faintly under the planet's dim sky. Big blue eyes stared at him, filled with fear. It looked so small, so helpless. "What the?" Jake muttered, kneeling beside it. The creature let out another soft whimper. It wasn't trying to escape. It was too weak. Someone had set a trap. Jake's instincts screamed at him. This was not normal. Creatures like this didn't belong in wastelands. And who had set the trap? He looked around, but there was no sign of life. No footprints, no movement, just the endless desert. His fingers hesitated over the net. Was this a trick? The creature trembled, its tiny body rising and falling with fast, panicked breaths. It wasn't trying to bite or attack. It was scared. Jake let out a breath. "All right, buddy. Let's get you out of there." He pulled out his knife and cut through the metal strands. The creature let out a tiny squeak as the net fell away. Then, to Jake's surprise, it crawled toward him. It pressed its small body against his boot, as if seeking warmth, as if it trusted him. Jake frowned. "You're not afraid of me." The creature blinked up at him, then chirped softly. A strange feeling washed over Jake. He had seen thousands of creatures across the galaxy, some dangerous, some beautiful, but none like this. Something about this one felt off. He gently picked it up. The fur was warm, softer than anything he had ever touched. As he cradled it in his arms, the creature let out a content sigh, curling up against his chest. Jake's lips pressed into a thin line. He couldn't leave it here. Not when someone had deliberately set a trap. And especially not when something deep in his gut told him this creature was important. He tapped his wrist communicator. "Ace, I'm coming back. Prep the ship for takeoff." A robotic voice crackled back. "Understood, Captain." Holding the creature carefully, Jake turned to leave. And then, a deep growl rumbled through the air. Jake froze. Slowly, he turned his head. Behind him, a massive shadow moved. Something was watching him. His scanner beeped urgently on his wrist. An unknown life form detected. The creature in his arms tensed. Its fur stood on end. Jake felt it shake. And then, without warning, the ground trembled. Whatever was out there was getting closer. The escape and the first sign. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The growl was deep, rumbling like a distant storm, but the sound was close, too close. His fingers tensed around the handle of his blaster as he turned, keeping the tiny creature cradled against his chest. The shadows shifted behind the jagged rocks. Something huge moved there, its outline barely visible through the dusty air. His wrist scanner beeped again, frantically flashing, unknown life form detected. High threat. Jake's gut twisted. He had survived on dangerous planets before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a wild beast. Something intelligent was out there, watching him. The creature in his arms let out a small, almost fearful chirp. Its glowing blue eyes darted toward the shadows, and for the first time, Jake noticed its tiny body shaking. Whatever was hunting them, It wasn't hunting him. It was hunting this creature. He had no time to think. The ground shook violently. A gust of hot air blew against his face as the massive figure lunged from the shadows. Jake reacted instantly. He spun on his heels and ran. His boots pounded against the cracked ground as the beast let out a roaring snarl behind him. Dust and debris exploded into the air as the predator gave chase. Jake didn't look back. He zigzagged through the rocky terrain, gripping the creature tightly against his chest. The ship was half a mile away. Too far. He needed to stall. He tapped his wrist communicator. Ace, fire up the cannons. Now. Warning. Hostile detected. Auto defense engage. From the distance, the low hum of his ship's plasma turrets powered up. Red targeting beams sliced through the dust, locking onto the creature chasing him. The beast roared, loud enough to make Jake's ears ring. And suddenly, it stopped. Jake's boots skidded against the rocky ground. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The creature stood there, half hidden in the fog. It was massive. Twice the size of Jake's ship, its skin a dark, pulsing red. But its eyes, they weren't wild. They weren't animalistic. They were calculating. It wasn't afraid of the ship's weapons. It was testing him. A chill crawled down Jake's spine. He had fought all kinds of predators, but nothing like this. His wrist communicator buzzed again. Captain, sensors detect multiple life forms approaching. Recommend immediate extraction. More of them. Jake didn't wait to find out. He sprinted toward the ship as the turrets fired warning shots into the air. The beast let out a final growl but didn't chase him. It simply watched. That was somehow worse. 5 minutes later, the ship's ramp sealed shut behind him. Jake collapsed into the pilot's chair, chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The tiny creature was still curled in his arms, its glowing blue eyes staring up at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, very slowly, the creature did something strange. It reached out one tiny paw and pressed it against Jake's chest. A warmth spread through him, a strange, electric feeling that wasn't quite pain, but wasn't normal either. His vision blurred for a second, and suddenly, a voice, soft, feminine, echoing in his mind. Thank you. Jake's breath caught. His arms tensed around the creature. That wasn't possible. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just an animal. It could communicate. His throat went dry. Who? What are you? The creature blinked at him, tilting its tiny head. Then, in a whisper-like voice that seemed to bypass sound itself, I am hiding. A chill ran through Jake's spine. Before he could say another word, the ship's alarms blared. Multiple ships inbound. His stomach turned. Those weren't just wild creatures out there. Someone, or something, was after them. And they had just found him. The transformation. Jake's fingers flew over the control panel as the ship's alarm blared in his ears. Incoming ship is DTKTE 3T Leviel. Unknown. Red warning lights flashed across the cockpit. Jake clenched his jaw as he scanned the sensors. 3. No, 4 ships were closing in fast. They were sleek, black, and unmarked. Not pirates. Not military. Something else. His gut twisted. They weren't after him. They were after the creature. Jake turned to the small, glowing being curled on his lap. Its big blue eyes weren't afraid. They were calm, watching him as if waiting for his next move. Jake exhaled. You better be worth the trouble, buddy. The creature blinked. Then, in that eerie, whispering voice that wasn't exactly a voice, it spoke again, straight into his mind. They will not stop. A shiver ran through Jake. Before he could question it, the enemy ships fired. A violent shockwave rattled his ship as energy bolts struck the hull. Jake gritted his teeth and yanked the controls, sending the ship into a sharp spin. The engines roared as he weaved through the sky, dodging another blast. ACE. Get the jump drive online. Calculating. Estimated time. 60 seconds. Too slow, Jake muttered. He needed to buy time. The enemy ships closed in, forming a tight formation behind him. They were hurting him, trying to force him into a trap. Jake's pulse quickened. Think. His eyes darted toward the asteroid field up ahead. Perfect. He gripped the controls and dove straight into the debris field. Massive chunks of rock floated in every direction, spinning unpredictably. One wrong move, and his ship would be space dust. But Jake had flown through worse. He twisted and turned through the tight gaps, hearing the enemy ships struggling to keep up. One of them wasn't fast enough. Boom! It slammed into a floating boulder and exploded in a fiery burst. Jake smirked. Amateurs. But his victory was short-lived. A blue energy field flickered on his sensors. One of the enemy ships had deployed a tractor beam. Before he could react, the ship violently jerked backward. The engine screamed as the beam locked on. Jake's stomach dropped. He was trapped. The creature in his lap stirred. Its soft fur bristled, and for the first time, Jake saw a new expression on its face: determination. It slowly stood up, its tiny body trembling. I cannot hide anymore. A sharp golden glow pulsed from its body. The fur shimmered, rippling like liquid light. Jake's breath caught as the creature began to change. Tiny limbs stretched, shifting into slender arms and legs. The small round body elongated, its fur fading away into smooth iridescent skin. A long flowing veil of silver hair cascaded down its back. Before Jake's eyes, the helpless little creature became something else entirely. A tall, stunning humanoid alien stood before him, her glowing blue eyes filled with ancient knowledge. Jake's heart pounded. What the hell? The woman turned toward the cockpit window, her gaze locking onto the enemy ships. She raised a hand, fingers trembling slightly, and whispered, "Release us." A blinding shockwave of energy burst from her fingertips. The cockpit flickered, static crackling through the screens. The tractor beam short-circuited. Jake barely had time to react before the ship lurched forward. Free. The alien woman swayed slightly, exhausted, before collapsing onto the co-pilot's seat. Jake stared at her, his breath uneven. "You just fried their systems." She nodded weakly. "Not for long. They will recover." Jake swallowed hard. He had so many questions, but there was no time. The enemy ships were already regaining power. Jake slammed the jump drive controls. "Hold on." With a violent burst of light, the ship shot into hyperspace, leaving the enemy fleet behind. For a long moment, the cockpit was silent, except for the soft hum of the engines. Jake leaned back, running a hand through his hair. His whole body was still buzzing with adrenaline. He turned to the woman, the alien who had just revealed herself. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on now?" She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then, in that same quiet, echoing voice, she said, "My name is Lyra, and because you saved me, they will never stop hunting you." Jake's stomach sank. He was now part of something much bigger than he ever wanted. The truth revealed. The ship hummed softly as it drifted through hyperspace. The blue glow of the warp tunnel flickered outside the cockpit windows, casting eerie shadows across the control panels. Jake sat in silence, one hand gripping the armrest of his chair while his mind raced. Across from him, the alien woman, Lyra, sat still, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders, her glowing blue eyes watching him with an unreadable expression. She had once been a small, helpless creature in his arms. Now she was something else entirely. Something powerful. Jake exhaled slowly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His ship had been hunted down, almost captured. A pack of unknown ships had come for this mysterious being. And now, he was in the middle of it. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "All right," he said, his voice level but firm. "No more games. Who are you? And why the hell are people trying to kill me for saving you? Lyra's gaze softened. For the first time, she looked tired, as if she had been running for a long time. She hesitated, then spoke in that strange, whispering voice that echoed in his mind rather than his ears. I am Lyra, the last of my kind. Jake narrowed his eyes. Last of your kind? What does that mean? She took a deep breath. I am not an ordinary being. My people, we were once powerful. We controlled energy in ways others could not. We could bend it, shape it, become one with it. But power, it breeds fear, and fear breeds destruction. Jake's fingers curled into fists. He had seen it before. Strong civilizations wiped out because others feared what they could become. Lyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. A long time ago, a war began. My people were hunted, wiped out by those who feared our abilities. Only a handful of us survived. I was one of them. I fled, hiding across the galaxy, taking forms that would keep me unnoticed. Jake nodded slowly, piecing it together. That's why you were that little creature. She gave a faint smile. Yes, it is easier to be seen as something weak, something harmless. But those ships, Jake motioned toward the empty stars ahead of them. They weren't just random bounty hunters, were they? Who are they? Her eyes darkened. They are the Echelon, a secretive group. They control much of the galaxy from the shadows, influencing wars, technology, and politics. They are afraid of me because I am proof of something they try to erase, a power they do not control. Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. Great, so I didn't just save a cute little alien. I saved the galaxy's most wanted fugitive. Lyra flinched slightly, guilt flashing across her features. I did not ask you to. You could have left me in that net. Jake scoffed. Yeah, sure. Just walk away while some unknown group hunts you down. That's not how I do things. Her glowing blue eyes studied him carefully. That is rare. He frowned. What? A human, willing to risk his life for someone he does not know. Jake rolled his eyes. Yeah, well, maybe humans don't like seeing innocent beings trapped like animals. Lyra tilted her head, as if considering his words. Perhaps that is why they fear your kind too. Jake stilled. What do you mean? She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. Humans are not the strongest species, nor the smartest, nor the fastest. But you are different. You are unpredictable. You are relentless. You survive things no other species can. You are not the most powerful in the galaxy, but you refuse to break. Jake didn't know what to say to that. He had been called a lot of things before. A scavenger, a rogue, a fool, but never something like that. Before he could respond, his ship's warning system blared to life. Proximity alert. Incoming ship. Jake's stomach twisted. Damn it. They found us. He turned back to the controls, scanning the radar, but what he saw made his blood run cold. It wasn't one of the Echelon's ships. It was something else. A massive warship loomed just outside hyperspace, its dark hull covered in strange, shifting symbols that seemed to flicker in and out of reality. It wasn't like anything Jake had ever seen before. Lyra's eyes went wide. No. Jake snapped his head toward her. What? What is it? Her voice trembled slightly. They are not with the Echelon. They are worse. The warship's weapons locked onto them. Jake's hands tightened around the controls. You wanna explain fast. Lyra swallowed hard. They are the ones who started it all. The ones who destroyed my people. The ones the Echelon fears. Jake cursed under his breath. The enemy ship's comms crackled to life. A cold, mechanical voice spoke through the speakers. Surrender the girl, or be erased. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. He turned to Lyra. She met his gaze with a calm, almost resigned look. They will not stop. They will chase us forever. Jake's jaw clenched. He hated running. He hated being pushed around. But most of all, he hated people who thought they could decide someone else's fate. He flipped a switch, powering up the ship's weapons. Yeah, let's see them try. The chase. The ship's interior bathed in the eerie red glow of warning lights. The enemy warship loomed outside the cockpit window, its dark, jagged hull shifting like it was alive. Strange symbols pulsed across its surface, flickering in and out of reality. It wasn't just a ship, it was something ancient. And it had found them. Jake's fingers hovered over the controls, his breath steady but heart racing. Surrender the girl, or be erased. The cold, mechanical voice crackled through the comms. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. He glanced at Lyra. She sat rigid, staring at the ship with a haunted look. Her glowing blue eyes flickered, her fingers curling into fists. They should not be here, she whispered, more to herself than to him. They were supposed to be gone. Jake arched an eyebrow. Well, they're not. And I'm guessing talking this out isn't an option. Her expression darkened. No, they do not negotiate. Jake exhaled sharply. Figures. His hand slammed down on the control panel. ACE, full power to the shields. Warning, enemy weapons are charging. Recommend immediate evasive action. No kidding, Jake muttered. His mind raced, running through options. Fighting head-on was suicide. His ship wasn't built for heavy combat. Running was the smart move, but these things had already tracked them once. Lyra shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening. We cannot outrun them. Not in open space. Jake shot her a sharp look. Then what do you suggest? Her glowing gaze locked onto his. We run where they will not follow. Jake frowned. And where's that? Her hand lifted, fingers brushing against the navigation controls. Instantly, a new set of coordinates flashed onto the screen. Jake's eyes narrowed. Fats. A deafening blast rocked the ship as the enemy warship opened fire. Jake barely had time to react. He yanked the controls hard to the right, sending the ship into a spiraling dive just as an energy beam tore through the space where they had been. His ship shuddered violently, shields flickering under the impact. Lyra didn't flinch. She pointed at the coordinates. Take us there. Now. Jake clenched his jaw. Damn it, I hate mystery jumps. Another blast nearly knocked them sideways. He had no choice. Gripping the controls, he punched in the coordinates and hit the jump drive. With a thunderous roar, the ship vanished into hyperspace, the forbidden sector. When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace, the cockpit window was filled with nothingness. Jake frowned. Where the hell are we? Outside, there were no stars, no planets, just a swirling, dark void stretching in every direction. The space around them felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to exist. Jake turned to Lyra. What did you just fly us into? She exhaled. The void rift. A place where time and space bend. A place that even my people feared. Jake scowled. Great. So now we're lost in some cursed space pocket instead of being dead. Big improvement. Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she turned, staring at the cockpit window with an expression Jake had never seen before. Unease. Jake's stomach tightened. Lyra. Her glowing blue eyes flickered. They followed us. Jake's blood ran cold. Before he could ask how, the ship's proximity alarms screamed. Jake's head snapped toward the radar. Nothing. No signals. No ships. Just empty space. And yet, a slow, inhuman voice echoed through the cockpit speakers. You cannot run from the void. Jake's fingers tightened on the controls. Oh, hell no. Suddenly, the space outside shifted. The enemy warship emerged from the void itself, its hull phasing into existence like it had been there all along. Its symbols pulsed brighter, spreading across the darkness like cracks in reality. Jake's breath caught. This thing wasn't just a ship, it was something else, something that had existed long before humanity, and it had no intention of letting them go. Lyra closed her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, but then the ship's lights flickered. Jake's eyes darted to the controls. "What are you doing?" Her voice was steady, but strained. "Connecting." Before he could protest, the ship lurched violently. Jake gasped as his vision blurred. Flashes of something ancient filled his mind. A war. Beams of pure energy. Planets collapsing into void. A hunt that had lasted for millennia. And then, Lyra. Alone. Running. Hiding. A sudden, powerful pulse snapped him back into reality. Lyra was glowing. Her entire body shimmered with raw energy, like a dying star ready to explode. Jake's gut twisted. "Lyra, stop." Her glowing gaze locked onto him. "They will not stop hunting me. Hunting us. Unless." The ship shook violently as the warship fired another blast. But before the energy could hit them, Lyra raised her hands. Jake's ship suddenly disappeared. The vanishing. Jake gasped, his body feeling weightless. 1 second, they were in the rift, trapped by an enemy they couldn't escape. And the next, silence. Jake blinked. The cockpit lights had returned to normal. The void was gone. The enemy ship was gone. He checked the scanners. No readings. No threats. It was as if they had never been there at all. Jake turned to Lyra, heart pounding. She slumped forward, completely drained. Jake barely caught her before she collapsed onto the control panel. Her voice was faint, her body trembling. "We are safe, for now." Jake exhaled slowly, lowering her gently onto the seat. "Yeah, well, remind me to never do that again." Lyra gave a weak, tired smile. "You are still alive." Jake let out a dry chuckle. Barely. He stared out into space, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know where they were. He didn't know what Lyra had just done. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. The final battle. A deep silence filled the ship. Not the usual silence of deep space, but an eerie, unnatural stillness. No hum of the engines. No beeping from the control panel. No distant echoes of space static. Jake's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. He felt like he was still in the cockpit, but something was off. The air was heavier, the lights dimmer, the space outside. Wrong. ACE. He called out. No response. He turned to Lyra. She lay unconscious in the co-pilot's seat, her once radiant skin dim, her breathing shallow. She had used too much energy. Jake swallowed hard. Lyra? Nothing. Then the ship shuddered. Jake spun toward the viewport, and his heart nearly stopped. The stars were gone. Instead, a massive swirling void stretched endlessly in all directions. Not empty space, something darker, something alive. It pulsed, shifting like liquid shadow. And then it moved. A shape emerged from the darkness. A towering, impossible form, neither solid nor gas, but something in between. It had no face, no eyes, just a twisting mass of pure black energy. Jake's entire body screamed in mourning. This wasn't just another enemy. This was something beyond understanding. And then a voice. Not spoken, not over the comms, directly into his mind. "You should not have brought her here." Jake gritted his teeth. "Yeah, well, you didn't leave me a lot of options." The presence shifted. The void pulsed, as if laughing. "You think you have escaped. You have only delayed the inevitable." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "Then tell me, who the hell are you?" A pause. Then, the space around them began to ripple. Images flashed before Jake's eyes. Not memories, not thoughts. Fragments of a war. An ancient battle. Planets burning. Beings of light. Lyra's kind, fighting against the shadows. Then, a single final image. A planet collapsing into the void. Erased from existence. "We are the silence." Jake's breath hitched. "You destroyed them," he whispered. "We consumed them." They were too dangerous, too powerful. His blood ran cold. And Lyra. The presence pulsed again. She is the last. And she will join them. Jake's heart pounded. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. The ship lurched violently. The controls short-circuited, sparks flying across the cockpit. The hull groaned as if being pulled apart by invisible hands. Jake refused to panic. His instincts kicked in. If they wanted a fight, they were getting one. With a sharp breath, he grabbed the control panel, manually overriding the engines. The ship roared to life, breaking free of whatever force was trying to crush it. Then, Lyra gasped. Her eyes snapped open, glowing brighter than ever before. The ship stabilized instantly. She turned, locking her gaze onto the darkness outside. Her voice, weak before, now carried power. You have taken enough. The void trembled. Jake watched in shock as Lyra lifted her hands. The air around her crackled with golden energy. Her body pulsed, her very presence radiating pure light. The void being recoiled. Impossible, it hissed. Jake's jaw dropped. What the hell is happening? Lyra's voice was steady. They are not invincible. The golden energy expanded outward, filling the cockpit with blinding light. The ship trembled, but this time not from damage, from power. The silence shrieked. For the first time, they felt fear. Jake grinned. Now that's more like it. With a sharp breath, he grabbed the weapons system. The ship's cannons, once useless against the enemy, flared to life with Lyra's energy. Let's see how you handle this, he muttered. With a single press of the trigger, the ship fired. A massive golden energy blast tore through the void. The silence screamed, their form collapsing, unraveling as Lyra's light cut through their existence. The ship shook violently. Lyra's hands trembled. The entire space around them bent and twisted, then shattered. And suddenly, they were free. Aftermath. The stars had returned. The warship was gone. The ship's systems were stabilizing. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His fingers unclenched from the controls. That was. He exhaled. Dan. Lyra, now visibly exhausted, gave him a weak smile. They are not gone forever. But they are. Weakened. Jake studied her. She had just done the impossible. She had faced something that erased civilizations. And won. His lips twitched. Not bad for someone I found stuck in a net. She chuckled softly, but her expression grew somber. You saved me, Jake. And now, because of that, they will never stop hunting you, either. Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Yeah, well, they're gonna have to get in line. Lyra's glowing gaze softened. You do not have to fight with me. Jake smirked. Are you kidding? After everything we just pulled off, I'm not going anywhere. A long silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time, Lyra smiled. A real, genuine smile. Jake stretched his arms and cracked his knuckles. So, where to next? She tilted her head, considering. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere they cannot reach us. For now. Jake nodded, powering up the engines. All right. But I gotta say, next time, let's pick a fight we actually have a chance of winning. Lyra chuckled. Agreed. With a low hum, the ship surged forward, two unlikely survivors, heading into the unknown. But one thing was certain. They weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. The victory and a new journey. The hum of the ship's engines thrummed softly in the background, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded mere hours ago. The silence, the ancient, terrifying entities that had erased civilizations, were gone, at least for now. Jake leaned back in the cockpit chair, exhaling a long breath as he stared out into the vast emptiness of space. The familiar stars had returned, blinking softly against the black canvas of the universe. Lyra sat beside him, visibly drained. The once radiant glow of her skin had dimmed, her silver hair falling loosely around her shoulders. But despite her exhaustion, her eyes were different now. They no longer held just fear. They held resolve. Jake smirked. "So, you want to tell me how you did that back there?" "Because I gotta say, turning my ship into a cosmic flamethrower wasn't exactly in the user manual." Lyra gave a small chuckle, though it was tired. "I simply awakened what was already there." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" She turned toward him fully, her glowing blue eyes locking onto his. "Your ship is metal. Wires. Energy. It follows the rules of physics and mechanics." She paused. "But you do not." Jake scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lyra studied him for a moment before speaking. "Humans are unusual. Your kind does not have the strongest bodies, nor the sharpest minds, nor the longest lifespans. And yet, you do something no other species does. You refuse to break, even when you should." Jake scratched the back of his head, unimpressed. "So what? We're just too dumb to know when to quit." Lyra smiled. "Perhaps, but that is what makes you different." Jake leaned forward, his smirk fading slightly. "You're saying humans are unpredictable?" Lyra nodded. "Yes. The silence can erase entire civilizations, but they cannot predict what they do not understand. They cannot control what does not follow a pattern. And that is you." Jake let that sink in. He had always been a survivor, but he had never thought of it as something unique. To him, it was just life. Fight. Adapt. Move forward. Now, it seemed that trait had just helped them win against an enemy that shouldn't be defeatable. He exhaled. "Well, that's a hell of a compliment." Lyra tilted her head. "It is not a compliment. It is the reason you are alive." Jake chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Well, I'd rather be alive than complimented to death. So I'll take it." She smiled, but then her expression turned serious. "The silence will return. They are weak now, but they do not stay weak for long." Jake nodded. He had no doubt. Something that powerful didn't just disappear forever. "So," he said, stretching his arms, "what's the plan? Keep running?" Lyra hesitated. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "No, we cannot run forever. They will find me. They will find you." Jake leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Then what?" Lyra's blue eyes burned. "We make sure they never rise again." Jake grinned. That was what he wanted to hear. He stood up, walking toward the control panel. His fingers danced over the holographic display, pulling up a galactic map. "All right then. First things first. We need allies. We need weapons. We need a plan that doesn't involve me getting blasted into space dust." Lyra nodded. "Agreed." Jake scrolled through the star maps, his mind already racing with possibilities. There were places, hidden places, where the remnants of old wars still lingered. Places with technology no one dared touch, weapons too dangerous to be controlled. If they wanted a fighting chance, they needed to find them first. His finger hovered over a red-marked sector. "The Wraith Belt," he muttered. "Rumors say it's full of forgotten warships, lost tech. We go there, see what's left." Lyra glanced at the map, nodding. "It is a good place to start." Jake smirked. "Then let's start there." With a flick of his wrist, the ship's engines roared to life. The cockpit lights brightened as the warp drive spun up. He turned to Lyra, his grin widening. "You in?" Lyra's lips curled into a small, determined smile. "Yes." Jake cracked his knuckles. "All right then. Let's go kick some cosmic ass." The ship shuddered as it jumped into hyperspace, streaking across the stars toward their next destination. They weren't running anymore. They were going to finish this. For good.